When someone leaves your life, but still lingers in your thoughts, the struggle to let them go can feel like a battle you fight quietly within yourself every single day. You replay conversations, imagine what could have been, and sometimes even feel their presence more strongly in their absence than you ever did when they were by your side. It's as if the person lives rent-free in your mind, shaping your emotions, dictating your moods, and influencing the way you experience the world around you. Today, we are going to dive deep into this experience through the lens of Carl Jung's psychology. Together, we will explore why this happens, how the unconscious binds us to someone even when we consciously want to move on, and what Jung believed about the process of individuation, healing, and reclaiming our inner freedom. By the end of this video, you will not only understand why this person still holds such a powerful grip over you, but also discover step by step how to release their hold and rediscover yourself. In this journey, we will discuss why someone stays in our mind long after they are gone, how memory and unconscious projections keep them alive inside us, what it means to confront the shadow they awakened within us, and how to work with Jung's idea of individuation to move beyond them. We will explore the painful cycle of attachment, why love often turns into obsession, and how imagination traps us in repetitive loops. Then, we will learn how to reframe these thoughts, redirect our psychic energy, and slowly transform the pain into wisdom. Along the way, I will share Jung's insights into the anima and animus, the archetypes that shape our love stories, and how understanding them can help us release the people we can't forget. We'll move from the haunting power of memory into the liberating possibility of renewal. So if you have ever asked yourself, why can't I stop thinking about them? Or, why does it feel impossible to let go? This is your chance to look deeper. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you may finally understand not only how to get over someone, but also how to get over the parts of yourself that keep them alive in your mind. Think about how strange it is. You can live an entire life, meet hundreds or thousands of people, form countless experiences, and yet, sometimes, one person remains etched into your psyche like a permanent mark. They can be an ex-lover, a close friend, or even someone who never fully belonged to you. But their impact feels larger than life. It is not just memory that keeps them alive. If it were just memory, time would slowly soften the image, and they would fade as everything does. But what Jung discovered is that it is not only the person themselves that we are holding on to. It is something deeper, something within us, projected outward onto them. They become a mirror of our unconscious, carrying pieces of ourselves that we cannot yet recognize. In other words, when you cannot let go of someone, it is not only them you are clinging to, it is a forgotten part of yourself. This is why Jung insisted that we must look within when we struggle with someone who continues to live in our minds, because the real problem is not that they are gone, but that a part of us remains unfinished. We replay their presence because we have not integrated the lesson or the hidden aspect of our psyche that they represent. Imagine that someone you loved awakened in you a sense of passion, tenderness, or vulnerability that you never knew before. When they leave, those feelings do not leave with them. They remain, waiting to be acknowledged. But since they were tied to that person, your mind keeps circling back to them as the source. In reality, the source is within you. What they awakened was always yours. You just haven't yet claimed it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The first step is to understand why someone can feel so unshakable in our thoughts. Jung often spoke about complexes, those bundles of thoughts, emotions, and memories that carry a powerful emotional charge. When a person becomes tied to one of our complexes, they act almost like a magnet inside our psyche. We think about them involuntarily. We feel pulled toward them without wanting to be. And no matter how rationally we try to convince ourselves to stop, the unconscious takes over. The more energy we resist, the more powerful the complex becomes. This is why you can tell yourself 100 times to let go, yet wake up the next morning with their image still in your mind. It is not weakness. It is the unconscious at work. This is where Jung's idea of projection enters. When you fall for someone, you often project onto them qualities that live in your own psyche but remain unrecognized. You may project your inner ideal of love, your hidden wounds, or your deep desires. This is why people can feel larger than life. You are not just seeing them. You are seeing yourself through them. And when they're gone, your mind struggles not because you lost them, but because you lost access to that part of yourself that they carried. Think of it like this. They became the screen onto which your unconscious projected a movie. When the screen is taken away, the film is still running, but you have nowhere to project it. The result is an endless loop of longing. So, how do we break free from this loop? Jung would say that the path forward begins with reclaiming the projection. You must take back what you gave away. This does not mean erasing them from memory, nor does it mean pretending they never mattered. It means asking yourself, what did I see in them that belongs to me? What did they awaken that I can now nurture without them? If you loved how they made you feel safe, perhaps the invitation is to find that safety within yourself. If you loved how they inspired you, perhaps the task is to recognize your own creative fire. This is not easy, because the unconscious prefers to keep us tied to the external figure rather than face our own depths. But freedom comes when we realize that the person was a doorway, not the destination. Yet even with this knowledge, the process of letting go is not simple. Love and attachment are sticky. They lodge themselves into the body as much as the mind. This is why you may feel the ache in your chest or the heaviness in your stomach when you think of them. Jung believed that the psyche communicates through symbols, and sometimes the person who lives in your mind has become such a powerful symbol that you cannot separate them from what they represent. For example, if they symbolized love itself to you, then losing them can feel like losing love itself. If they represented your sense of worth, their absence feels like the collapse of your value. And if they embodied hope, their departure can feel like despair. This is why grief after love is so consuming. It is not just about them. It is about what they came to symbolize in your inner world. Here, Jung's idea of the shadow becomes essential. The shadow is everything we do not want to acknowledge in ourselves, the insecurities, desires, fears, and impulses that we push away. Often, the people who live in our minds are the ones who triggered our shadow the most. Maybe they made us feel inadequate. Maybe they saw a side of us that we were ashamed of. Or maybe they awakened desires we did not know how to handle. When they leave, that shadow is left behind, unintegrated. And so, we keep thinking of them because we are actually wrestling with ourselves. To get over them, we must face the shadow they revealed. We must ask, what part of me did they bring to the surface? And how can I accept that part instead of pushing it away? Think about how liberating this could be. Instead of being haunted by someone's memory, you start to see that they were a messenger of your unconscious. They were a mirror, showing you the hidden truths you could not see on your own. And once you understand this, the obsession slowly transforms into gratitude. Not gratitude for the pain, but gratitude for the revelation. You begin to see that their role was never to complete you, but to introduce you to yourself. And once you integrate that lesson, they no longer need to live in your mind. They can rest in memory, while you carry forward the truth they awakened. This does not mean the process is quick. Jung knew that the unconscious resists change. The complexes do not dissolve overnight, but each time you stop and reflect instead of falling into the repetitive loop, you reclaim a little more of your power. Each time you notice what they represent instead of who they are, you take a step closer to freedom. Over time, the emotional charge weakens. The magnet inside loses its pull, And one day, you realize that you can think of them without feeling consumed. That is when you know you have truly moved on, not because they are gone, but because you are whole. When you begin to see that the person who still lives in your mind is not just a memory, but also a mirror of your unconscious, you start to ask deeper questions. What was it about them that seemed to have so much power over you? Why do some people leave almost no trace, while others stay inside you like a permanent echo? Jung would answer by pointing to the archetypes. He believed that within each of us live universal patterns, figures that shape the way we love, dream, and relate. Two of the most powerful are the anima and animus. The anima is the inner feminine image within a man's psyche, and the animus is the inner masculine image within a woman's psyche. These figures act as guides to the soul, but they also tend to be projected outward onto real people. When we meet someone who embodies qualities of our anima or animus, we feel magnetically drawn to them, sometimes with an intensity that feels like fate itself. This is why certain people can feel so unforgettable. They are not just themselves in your eyes. They carry the weight of an archetype. They seem like the key to your soul, the missing piece of your being. When they smile, you feel illuminated. When they walk away, you feel abandoned not just by a person, but by the very principle of love, passion, or meaning. Jung noticed that these relationships are often the most intoxicating, but also the most painful, because when the projection collapses, we are left not only with heartbreak, but also with the daunting task of reclaiming what we had placed onto them. In other words, the reason they still live in your mind is because they carried your own soul image, and until you reclaim it, your psyche will keep searching for them, as if finding them again will restore your lost wholeness. This explains why letting go often feels impossible. It is not just about the person. It is about your relationship with the deepest layers of yourself. If you projected your inner ideal of love onto them, you may find yourself believing that they were the only one who could ever make you feel alive again. If you projected your strength or your security, you may feel that without them you are weak or unprotected. But Jung would remind us that these qualities never belonged to them. They were always inside you, waiting for recognition. The projection was simply the unconscious trying to bring your attention to them. The tragedy is that we confuse the messenger for the message, and when the messenger leaves, we feel abandoned by our own soul. To break this cycle, Jung encouraged what he called the withdrawal of projections. This is not about suppressing your feelings or pretending the person does not matter. It is about slowly peeling back the layers to see what qualities you have given away. You ask yourself, what did I admire in them? What made me feel alive in their presence? What did I think only they could provide? And then you turn those questions inward. Can I cultivate that same passion, safety, or inspiration within myself? Can I recognize that what I thought was outside me has always been within? This process can feel uncomfortable, even threatening, because the psyche resists taking back responsibility. It prefers to keep the magic outside, where it seems easier to chase. But true growth comes when we realize that the magic was never theirs. It was ours all along. Consider how different this perspective is from the way we usually think about heartbreak. Most people believe the solution is simply to move on, distract themselves, or find someone new. And while those things can provide temporary relief, they rarely resolve the deeper issue. Because if the projection is not withdrawn, it will simply find a new host. You may think you have gotten over one person, only to find yourself obsessing over another, repeating the same cycle. Jung's approach offers a more lasting transformation. By recognizing what was projected and integrating it back into your own being, you break the cycle. You no longer need another person to carry your inner image. You begin to embody it yourself. And when that happens, relationships become freer, healthier, and less haunted by unconscious need. This process is not purely intellectual. It requires emotional work, often through reflection, journaling, or even dreams. Jung placed great emphasis on dreams because he believed they reveal the hidden dynamics of the unconscious. If someone still lives in your mind, they will often appear in your dreams, sometimes in ways that are puzzling or symbolic. Paying attention to these dreams can help you understand what they represent. For example, if you dream of them ignoring you, it may reflect your fear of abandonment. If you dream of them guiding you, it may symbolize the qualities you still need to develop in yourself. Dreams do not give direct answers, but they offer clues. And each clue helps you see that the person in your mind is not just an external figure, but an inner symbol guiding you toward growth. But let's not overlook the raw truth. This work hurts. It hurts to realize that the person you thought was your salvation was actually a projection. It hurts to admit that your mind clings to them not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. Yet, there is also relief in this realization, because once you see it, you no longer need to chase ghosts. You begin to understand that healing is not about erasing them. It is about integrating yourself. The part of you that was waiting for them to give you love, security, or meaning is the very part that you can now give to yourself. Think about the image of a broken mirror. When you are lost in someone else, it is like looking into a mirror that reflects back only half of who you are. You believe you need them to complete the reflection, but Jung's psychology teaches us to pick up the shards, to piece together the mirror within, so that when you look, you see the full image of yourself. It is not about rejecting love or connection. It is about making sure that when you love, you are not giving away parts of your soul that you have not yet claimed. Of course, this sounds noble in theory, but in practice, the pull of memory is relentless. You wake up in the morning and think of them. You pass a place you once visited together and feel the ache in your chest. Music, smells, small details, all of these bring them back. Jung would not tell you to resist these memories, because resistance only strengthens them. Instead, he would suggest observing them, letting them arise without judgment, and then asking, what does this memory reveal about me? If the memory of laughter together makes you smile and ache, perhaps it reveals your own longing for joy and lightness. If the memory of conflict still stings, perhaps it reveals the wound you are carrying in your own shadow. Each memory becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor, and over time, the charge weakens because you are no longer feeding it with resistance. You are transforming it into insight. This transformation is also deeply tied to the body. Jung recognized that the psyche is not just in the mind. It expresses itself through the body. Heartbreak can feel like actual physical pain because the body holds the emotions that the mind cannot process. This is why practices that involve the body, breathing, movement, even mindful stillness, can help release someone from your system. When you consciously breathe through the ache or allow yourself to feel the heaviness without running from it, you are giving the unconscious space to process what words cannot. It is in these quiet, embodied moments that integration often begins. You realize that the ache is not just about them. It is about you reclaiming the parts of yourself that were hidden in the relationship. Another powerful step Jung pointed to is individuation, the process of becoming whole. Individuation means slowly becoming who you truly are, beyond projections, beyond societal masks, beyond the illusions of love that bind you. When someone still lives in your mind, they are often pointing you toward the next step in your individuation. They show you what is missing, what is unclaimed, what is calling for your attention. Perhaps they revealed your vulnerability, and individuation requires you to embrace it instead of hiding it. Perhaps they awakened your creativity, and individuation requires you to nurture it rather than leaving it dormant. In this way, the pain of holding on to them becomes a map. Every obsessive thought, every lingering memory is a signpost. directing you inward, toward the self you are meant to become. When you approach it this way, the journey of letting go shifts. It is no longer about erasing someone from your mind. It is about following the trail they left back to your own soul. It is about realizing that the reason they were so unforgettable is because they carried something of you that you had not yet recognized. And once you take it back, they no longer need to stay. They did their job. They awakened you. And now, you are free to live without their ghost overshadowing your life. But perhaps the most difficult part of this journey is patience. The unconscious does not move quickly. Healing is not linear. Some days you may feel free. Other days you may feel pulled back into the old longing. Jung would tell you this is normal. Complexes do not dissolve with a single insight. They soften over time as you continually choose to reflect, to withdraw projection, and to embody what was once given away. And in this ongoing process, you begin to notice something subtle but profound. The person still lives in your mind, but no longer with the same power. They are no longer a tyrant over your emotions, but a quiet figure in the background of your story. You can think of them, remember them, even dream of them, without losing yourself. That is the true freedom, when someone can live in your memory, but no longer live in your mind. Even when we begin to understand projection, complexes, and the symbolic nature of the person who lingers in our mind, the heart has its own stubborn rhythm. You may tell yourself that you understand the psychology, that you know it is really about you and not them, and yet the feelings persist. This is because the psyche is not purely rational. Jung never tired of reminding us that logic cannot dissolve emotional energy. The unconscious runs on images, symbols, and feelings, not arguments. That means you cannot simply reason yourself out of missing someone. You cannot just say, they were a projection, and expect the longing to vanish. Healing requires not only insight, but also transformation of energy. The love, desire, or pain that once flowed toward them must find a new channel. One of the biggest traps people fall into after a breakup or separation is imagination. You begin to replay the past, sometimes idealizing it, sometimes rewriting it with new endings. You also imagine the future that could have been, the trips you might have taken, the life you might have built together, the love you might have shared. Jung would say this is the unconscious trying to complete the story. When a complex is activated, it does not want to leave things unfinished. It pushes you to imagine again and again, as if by rewriting the script in your mind, you could finally settle it. But the truth is, imagination rarely brings peace in these situations. Instead, it keeps you chained to the past, unable to move forward. This is where Jung's concept of active imagination becomes helpful. Active imagination is not the same as daydreaming about the past. It is a conscious dialogue with the images and figures of the unconscious. Instead of passively replaying memories of the person, you engage with their image as a symbolic figure. You might sit quietly, imagine them before you, and ask, "What do you want from me? What are you here to teach me?" Then you allow your imagination to respond, not by controlling it, but by letting it unfold. In this process, the person in your mind begins to reveal their symbolic role. They may say things that surprise you, offer insights you did not expect, or represent feelings you had been avoiding. The point is not to treat this as the real person, but as the inner figure who carries your projections. By engaging with them consciously, you begin to integrate what they represent, rather than endlessly replaying the same old loops. Through this, something remarkable happens. The figure that once haunted you begins to transform. Instead of being a ghost of someone you lost, they become a guide to your own growth. They show you what part of yourself you need to develop. They reveal the wounds that need healing, the desires you must own, the fears you must face. And once you integrate those lessons, Their presence in your mind naturally begins to fade. They no longer need to stand at the center of your thoughts, because the energy has been reclaimed. This is the deeper meaning of letting go. It is not about forgetting. It is about transformation. Another layer of Jung's thought that helps here is the idea of the self. For Jung, the self is the totality of who we are, our conscious identity, our unconscious depths, and our potential for wholeness. The self is always guiding us, often through symbols, dreams, and relationships. When someone becomes unforgettable, Jung would see this as the self trying to lead you toward growth. The person you cannot forget may represent an aspect of your journey toward wholeness. Their lingering presence is not a mistake, but a signal. The task is to ask, what role are they playing in the story of my individuation? What is the self trying to show me through them? For example, if you cannot stop thinking about someone who rejected you, perhaps the self is pointing to your shadow of insecurity, inviting you to face the places where you seek validation outside yourself. If you cannot let go of someone who inspired you, perhaps the self is calling you to embody that same inspiration in your own life, rather than waiting for it to come from another. Each obsession has a purpose. It is never random. The person who will not leave your mind is a chapter in your soul's book, and the challenge is to read that chapter fully rather than getting stuck on the same sentence. This process also involves grief. Jung acknowledged that we cannot bypass the mourning of love lost. Even if much of what we felt was projection, the emotions were real. The connection, however symbolic, mattered. To deny the grief is to deny the reality of the psyche. That is why allowing yourself to mourn is an essential part of moving on. Mourning means accepting that what you wanted will not happen, that what was possible is no longer possible. It means feeling the sadness without turning it into obsession. And though grief hurts, it also cleanses. By letting yourself cry, ache, and accept the loss, you create space for new energy to flow. Without grief, the psyche stays stuck, repeating the past. With grief, the door slowly opens to renewal. At this point, it may seem like letting go requires climbing a mountain of inner work, withdrawal of projections, shadow integration, active imagination, individuation, grief. And in truth, it is not a quick process. Jung did not believe in shortcuts, but he also believed that the psyche has a natural drive toward healing. If you pay attention, reflect honestly, and allow the process to unfold, the unconscious will guide you. Dreams will shift. The intensity of the person's presence will fade, and you will begin to feel your own energy returning. It is like slowly reclaiming pieces of your soul that you had scattered across someone else. With each piece you take back, you feel more whole, more alive, more grounded in yourself. One of the most painful aspects of not being able to get over someone is the feeling of being stuck in the past while life moves on around you. You see others thriving, meeting new people, building new lives, while you feel frozen in memory. Jung would say this sense of paralysis comes from the unconscious holding too much of your energy in the complex. To free yourself, you must consciously redirect your libido, that is, your psychic energy, into new channels. This could be creative work, meaningful projects, or spiritual practices. When the energy that once went toward longing is given a new outlet, the obsession begins to loosen. This is not distraction in the shallow sense. It is transformation. The energy of love that once flowed outward toward them now flows inward and into the world. Consider how this might look in practice. Let's say you once admired someone for their passion and vitality. After they are gone, you feel empty, as if that passion left with them. Instead of waiting for them to return or for someone else to provide it, you begin to cultivate your own passion. You take up a creative pursuit, explore a long-neglected interest, or engage in meaningful work. Over time, you realize that the fire you thought belonged to them has always been yours. Or perhaps you long for the safety they once gave you. Instead of chasing it in memory, you practice creating a safe inner space. Through reflection, through self-care, through boundaries that honor your needs. Slowly, you learn that the safety you craved was never theirs to give permanently. It is something you can now provide for yourself. Each step like this withdraws the projection and heals the bond. It is important to notice that this process does not diminish love. In fact, it deepens it. Jung believed that true love can only exist when it is free of projection. When you stop expecting another person to carry your soul image, you can see them more clearly for who they are, rather than who you want them to be. This is the paradox of letting go. By withdrawing projections, you not only release the person who lives in your mind, but you also open the possibility of loving more authentically in the future. Love becomes less about filling a void and more about sharing fullness. And when that happens, relationships are no longer haunted by the ghosts of those you could not forget. This brings us to one more subtle but essential insight: forgiveness. Forgiveness in Jung's sense is not about excusing what someone did or pretending the pain did not happen. It is about releasing the grip that resentment or longing has over you. As long as you are bound to the story of how they hurt you or how they abandoned you, they continue to live in your mind with power. Forgiveness is the act of saying, "You are no longer my captor. I release you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve freedom." This act is less about them and more about your own individuation. It is about claiming your own story instead of being trapped in theirs. And often, forgiveness comes only after the other steps. After grief, after withdrawal of projection, after integration of the shadow. But when it comes, it feels like a deep breath after years of suffocation. You realize they no longer live in your mind, not because you forced them out, but because you no longer need them there. In the end, the journey of getting over someone who still lives in your mind is not a straight path, but a spiral. You circle around the memories, the projections, the grief, again and again. Each time you circle, you gain a little more insight, a little more freedom. At first, the circles are tight and painful, but over time, they widen and the grip loosens. Eventually, you find yourself looking back not with obsession, but with perspective. You see that their presence was both a wound and a gift. They hurt you, but they also awakened you. They left, but they left you with yourself. And in that realization, you find peace. As the circles of healing widen, and the figure who once consumed your mind slowly begins to take their rightful place in memory, something new emerges. It is not just freedom from obsession. It is the quiet recognition that you are not the same person who once clung so desperately to them. Through the struggle, you have discovered depths of yourself that you never knew before. You have faced your shadow, reclaimed your projections, mourned your losses, and begun to embody the qualities you once believed only they could awaken. In the language of Jung, you have taken another step toward individuation. You have moved closer to becoming the whole person you were always meant to be. But what does this mean for the way you live now? When someone has lived in your mind for so long, their absence can feel like an emptiness. You may find yourself asking, if they no longer occupy this space, what will? Jung would remind you that the psyche never tolerates a vacuum. The energy that was once tied up in longing must be redirected, or else it risks creating new obsessions. This is where the work of conscious living begins. The energy you have reclaimed is not meant to lie dormant. It is meant to flow into creativity, love, purpose, and presence. The question is not only how do I get over them, but also what do I do with the self that is emerging from this? For many people, the answer is creativity. Jung himself found in painting, writing, and building his famous tower at Ballingen a way of expressing the unconscious in form. He believed that creativity allows us to give shape to what would otherwise remain stuck in the psyche. When you cannot get over someone, that energy is raw, intense, and often painful. But when you channel it into art, music, writing, or any form of creation, it becomes something beautiful, something transformative. The person who once haunted you becomes the inspiration for a deeper connection with life itself. They cease to be a ghost and instead become a muse, not one who controls you, but one who helped awaken your creative fire. For others, the answer is relationship, not rushing into a new one, but learning to relate differently. Jung believed that once we withdraw projections, we can finally see people as they are, not as we need them to be. This means that future connections can be built on reality rather than fantasy, on mutual growth rather than unconscious expectation. You may find that when you meet someone new, you no longer cling to them as a savior. Instead, you can share your wholeness with them, and they with you. This is what Jung called a Konyangsho, a true union, not of halves seeking completion, but of two whole beings coming together in love. The person you could not get over prepared you for this, by forcing you to face the parts of yourself you once gave away. Now, you stand ready for a love that is freer, deeper, and more authentic. Another answer is spirituality. Jung often spoke of how the longing we feel in relationships is ultimately a longing for the self, for union with the greater whole of existence. The intensity of missing someone, the ache of their absence, can sometimes be redirected into spiritual seeking. You realize that the love you wanted from them was a glimpse of a love far larger, the love that comes from connection to life, to God, to the mystery that holds us all. In this way, heartbreak becomes a doorway to the sacred. The one who lived in your mind becomes the one who guided you toward the infinite. And in that recognition, the personal story dissolves into something greater. You see that your longing was never only for them. It was for the eternal that they symbolized. Of course, none of this denies the humanity of the pain. There will still be days when you think of them unexpectedly, when the old longing stirs, when you wonder what might have been. But the difference now is that these moments no longer control you. You can feel them, honor them, and let them pass. They become part of your story rather than the whole story. They become a chapter you can read without losing yourself in its pages. And as time continues, their figure grows smaller, while your sense of self grows larger. One of the most profound insights Jung offered is that the greatest encounters in our lives are often the ones that wound us. He called these wounding experiences gateways to individuation. The person you cannot forget was perhaps one of these gateways. They broke your heart, but in doing so, they broke open the walls around your unconscious. They forced you to see parts of yourself you had ignored. They pushed you onto a path you might never have chosen, but which has led you closer to wholeness. In this sense, they were both your wound and your healer, not because they returned to make things right, but because their absence forced you to turn inward and find the healer within. Imagine yourself now, months or years from today, looking back at this time. You remember the ache, the longing, the countless nights replaying conversations in your head. But you also see how much you grew because of it. You see how the fire of obsession burned away illusions, how grief carved out a space for depth, how longing turned into creativity, how pain turned into wisdom. And you realize that the person you thought you could never get over has become part of your inner foundation, not as a ghost, not as a chain, but as a stone in the building of your soul. They no longer live in your mind, because they live in your growth, and that is where they were meant to be all along. So if you are still struggling, still waking up with their face in your thoughts, still feeling as if they control your heart, let this remind you, this is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of a transformation. What feels like captivity is really the psyche's way of drawing your attention to your own unfinished business. What feels like obsession is really a call to reclaim what was yours, and what feels like endless longing is really the self inviting you to step into wholeness. Every thought of them, every ache, every tear is part of this alchemy. You are not failing by remembering. You are healing by remembering differently. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The person who still lives in your mind is part of that darkness. Not evil, but hidden, repressed, unacknowledged. By facing them, not as a real presence, but as a symbol, you make that darkness conscious. And in doing so, you move closer to light. This is not a quick or easy path, but it is a real one. And when you emerge, you will not only be free of their hold, you will also be more fully yourself than you have ever been. So let this be your reassurance. You can get over someone who still lives in your mind, not by erasing them, not by pretending they never mattered, but by seeing them for what they truly are, a messenger of your unconscious, a mirror of your soul, a guide toward your own wholeness. They were never meant to stay forever. They were meant to awaken you. And once you understand that, you can finally release them with gratitude and step forward into a life that is yours alone to live. And maybe, just maybe one day you will thank them. Not for the love you shared, not for the pain they caused, but for the role they played in bringing you back to yourself. Because in the end, that is what matters most. Not who stayed, not who left, but who you became in the process. And that person, the one you are becoming now, is stronger, wiser, and more whole than the one who first fell in love. That is the gift hidden in the ache. That is the peace of letting go. And that is how you finally get over someone who once lived in your mind and begin to live fully in your own.